preserve and provide access to the story of the state, and to support libraries in their role as essential community anchors. We have been around since 1828. We predate statehood. We are one of the earliest libraries in Michigan, and we have modeled the way that we work for serving state government and the people of Michigan, much how the Library of Congress works at the federal level. So if you're looking at a model of how our services are, that's what we sort of look at for guidance in how we do things here at the state level. We originally were as a territorial library within the territorial capital, which is that building right there. Had a collection of 131 items. It's now vastly more than that, and well over 1 million, if not into millions. When we became a state, we transitioned to being called the Michigan State Library. A decade later, we moved from Detroit to Lansing, existed in the second capital, was in a state office building during the 1870s during the construction of the current capitol, was in the third capitol building in the west wing of it from its opening in 1879 up until part of it moved out in the 20s to another state office building, but the law library stayed in there up until I believe the 1960s. Then moved around to a few other places after experiencing a pretty devastating state office building fire in 1951. Lost about 30 to 35 items with that. And then eventually transitioned to our current home in 1988, the Michigan Library and Historical Center, and we had changed names from the Michigan State Library to the Library of Michigan in 1983, which helps differentiate us from our neighbors down in East Lansing, where there's Michigan State University libraries. But if you look at our color scheme, we're a bit more akin to the University of Michigan libraries now because of the blue instead of some of the previous color schemes that we've had. So it can sometimes be hard when you get reference questions. Are you in Ann Arbor? No, we're in Lansing. Oh, you're with Michigan State? No, we are with state government. But our current home, if you haven't been there yet, is that building right down there. We are on the west side, or the left of it. On the east side is the State Archives and the State Museum, and you can't miss us because we're the only building in all of Lansing that has a giant white pine tree named Carl in the middle of it. So if you're driving on Kalamazoo Avenue and you see Carl the tree, you know you're in the right spot. This is just a picture of what the interior of the atrium looks like. It has a very cathedral feel to it. I've been in this spot right here on the second floor and heard somebody talking on their cell phone up on the fourth floor of the building and had to go up to them and say, we don't need to know what your dinner plans are. You might want to take that phone call someplace else. So it's interesting with how well the acoustics are in the library itself. Some of the main types of collections that researchers will use. Certainly, we're the home of probably the largest collection of state documents, including the early joint documents produced by the Legislative Council and early forms of state government, annual reports of government departments, agencies, and commissions, compiled laws and rules. We also have what we call one of our main collections, just called the Michigan Collection, because that includes newspapers from all around the state that are on microfilm or in print, other periodicals, gazetteers and city directories, plat maps, other different types of maps, county and place history, cemetery transcriptions, anything that is a privately published item about Michigan in some sort of way. We try to have copies of it. And you're also including things like meeting minutes that have been published from city government or something like that. We try to have all of those. We're also home to the State Law Library, so we have a pretty significant law collection. And we also have a rare book room that is 1/3 Michigan, 1/3 law, and 1/3 Americana. The oldest item is from 1490. I think one of my favorite things that's in there is this publication called Dogdom, which was a periodical produced out of Battle Creek starting around 1900 up until the 1930s that's just all about dogs. artifacts. So if you wanted to find anything as far as like articles that dealt with, you know, the Pekingese breed, or if there were dog shows that were going on across the United States, if you want to do the ancestry of your own animal, you know, if you have a purebred, you might find something in that. We're always on the lookout for items. I think a big thing that we're on the hunt for these days are yearbooks. But anything that you may find that you're like, oh, this might be worthwhile for the Library of Michigan. If you just go to michigan.gov/librarygift, or I also have a handout over here along with our services and collections handout that just talks about the types of things that we're on the hunt for. And then, like I said, with the services and collections one, that talks about just more in detail of the different types of services that we offer. Does anybody have any questions about Library of Michigan? Okay, better all come visit. All right, so to get into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about Michigan County Poor Farms. I first got introduced to this topic when I was doing research for a class in 2012. It was a Techniques in Local and Archival History class. We had to choose a topic that related to Grand Rapids and Kent County history. And so I was working for Kent District Library at the time at their Kentwood branch, and that's located at on Breton in between 52nd and 44th Street. Well, just down the road on 32nd in Kalamazoo and Breton is where the Kent County Poor Farm used to be located. And so, starting to do a bit of research into that, you know, turned in my final paperwork. This was, like I said, in 2012, and I'm still doing research on it today. So, I have people that tell me it's a bit more of an obsession than a hobby, but I find it to be really cool. And sometimes, as you're doing research, you can find out that you have an ancestor of your own that may have existed in one of these facilities, either here in Michigan or elsewhere, because poor houses and poor farms existed in many of the New England states. Several others also were out west, beyond the Midwestern states. My great-great-grandmother, Hattie Oster, is the one example that I've been able to find where she was listed in the 1924 Register book for the Gratiot County Poorhouse, which was based out of Ithaca. That's a picture of the building right there. She was there for several weeks until later on being transferred up to the state asylum up in Traverse City, where she would be there for a few more years until she passed away. I think it was 1927. So you never know. You might find somebody, especially when they're either reaching a certain age where they can't take care of themselves, or that they're physically handicapped or mentally handicapped in some way, that they may end up in places like this. This is just a picture of where the Kent County facility used to be, which first started me doing this research. This here is Plaster Creek, right here. That's 32nd Street right there. This is an aerial image from 1955. They first put the facility out here in 1855. And one of the early buildings was right about here. And then eventually in 1892, they added that large structure right there. Another infirmary building in 1817, and then an annex building in 1930. And you can see between the barns, several of those different buildings, it was a pretty significant complex that you had several hundred people there. And this little spot right there, that's the cemetery. And out of everything that's out there, that's pretty much the only thing that's left if you were to go out there today. These are just some pictures of from a 1909 article that was called "Bright Side to Life at the County Home," and you can see a lot of vegetables and gardens, the dormitories right there. You're getting bed over your, a bed and a roof over your head, and 3 square meals a day, and that's kind of about it. These are just some pictures of a few of the other ones that are from around the state. The Tuscola County one in Caro, the one in Grayling, Crawford County. What's interesting, and these are all the postcards that I've collected over the past few years, and and the one in Crawford County, it says, what is the use of working when you have a home like this? It kind of goes to a little bit of the stigma at that time for people that were either paupers, unemployed, did not have the ability to work in some sort of way. That building is certainly gone right now. The one in Kalamazoo is gone as well. That's now at County Park out there. The one in Midland is gone, and you can't get anywhere on the land where it's at because it's the property is now a large retention pond used by Dow Chemical. So if you try to go out there, you'd have to cross a big fence where security patrols around. So it's interesting what they've done with that land since the county sold all that off. The Ionia County one, the building is gone, the cemetery is there, the property is now part of the Ionia State Recreation Area. Jackson County one, that building also is gone. When they were about to demolish it, somehow a fire started and the building burned down. But just what's left with there is the cemetery just a few hundred yards away from it. So you can kind of see some characteristics that are very similar to them, where they have a central office with wings that go off to the side. It's very similar, but down here you can kind of see a little bit of that here, wing over here, and wing over here. And that's very similar to what you would find with different types of state asylums, psychiatric hospitals at the time period, where they followed, I believe it was called a Kirkbride plan. The early version of the Kalamazoo Psychiatric Hospital had that same sort of thing. If you go up to Traverse City, same type of architecture, following that similar kind of plan. So let's just talk a little bit about the origins of Michigan Poor Law, what really kind of started all of this. There's a couple key pieces of legislation that sort of started all of this as we were going from a territory to a state. A lot of it's all based on legislation from New England states. The first one in October of 1805, an Act for the Relief of the Poor, was based on a New Jersey law, which allowed a pauper to petition 3 justices of the peace, alleging that such person is destitute of support and is capable of labor. The justices were to investigate the claim, and if they found it to be true, they would grant to the pauper a certificate and approve them to be becoming a public charge. It also outlined a procedure for the marshal of the territory to contract with the person offering the lowest terms for the support of such pauper, provided that no contract be made for a greater sum than 25 cents per day. So what they were doing is they were just farming them out to whoever was willing to be paid to for maintaining them in some sort of capacity. In 1809 was the Act for the Support of the Poor, defined who was eligible for public support and set up the 3-member panel known as the Overseers of the Poor. And then we have the Act for the Relief of the Poor, based on an Ohio law that allowed the children of the poor to be bound out to apprenticeships. And then they also repealed the 1805 Act. And then we had other different pieces of legislation. And then finally, the Legislative Council passed in 1830 the Act to authorize the establishment of poorhouses. And so this is where we get several decades of how things were being, or to be the model for how we would be going for several decades once this legislation was passed. So the first county poorhouse in Michigan was in Wayne County, established in 1832. It was originally located in Hamtramck Township, which is now the northwest corner of Gratiot and Mount Elliott Avenues in Detroit. It would later move closer to Canton, Wayne area. If you're familiar with the Eloise facility, that's what that eventually evolved into. This 70-some building complex that had dormitories, tuberculosis hospital. They were serving like thousands of meals a day. And that surely just shows the need that was in a large population place like Wayne County. Was every other county like that? No, not to that extent. But certainly you could, what they were initially was what you would start to see in other places throughout Michigan. Yes, and the insane asylum. And if you go out there now, there's only about a couple buildings that are left. The cemetery is there, but I don't think they allow anybody out there, because I know there was a bit of a tripping hazard with how the stones were out there. And I think the main Keybeard building has been sold into private hands, that they're going to do something with it.
Talking about a hotel.
Yeah, hotel, ghost tours, different things like that.
The cemetery is just cement blocks with numbers.
Yes, yeah, and there's several thousand people that are buried out there. So just to give some definitions, when we're talking about poor house, poor farm, this is kind of how I've come up with a definition for them. A poor house is a place maintained at public expense to house needy or dependent persons within a county. A poor farm is a rural poorhouse or a city farm that is basing its economy off of farming. They were trying to use the agriculture as a means of sustaining them, either by providing food or using that to sell to augment the resources that they were getting through the municipalities. They were meant to be self-sustaining, but few ever turned any sort of a profit. Calhoun County is one of the few that I've ever seen like actual literature saying like, oh, we were doing quite well this year, that we were able to provide a lot more resources because of what they were producing as far as agriculture and animals and different things like that. All able-bodied inmates were required to work, whether that's out in the fields or helping with laundry, doing dishes, cleaning clothes, all that sorts of thing. And you'll find that some of the names might change a bit. I've seen everything from like almshouse, house of refuge, poor house, poor farm, county infirmary, and some of that is based on changes in legislation. But just to give an idea that like when I've been doing research on the Kent County facility, it was traditionally the poor farm or the county house. Later on, you'd find it called the county home. Soon, around 1917, they've gotten into calling it the county infirmary. And then by the 1950s, it was given a different name of Maple Grove Home and then Maple Grove Medical Facility. The one in Eastmanville, I believe it was called Community Haven for a while. One in Hastings for Berry County was called Thornapple Manor. So they're trying to, you can see after a certain period of time that there was trying to eliminate that stigma and sort of soften the titles for these types of facilities. So we're going down a few different decades, and then finally we get Public Act 148 of 1869, and it's this wonderful legislation that's called an Act to Revise and Consolidate the several acts relating to the support and maintenance of poor persons. They didn't really come up with a good acronym for it. But what it does is, like what it says, is it consolidates all this legislation, and then sort of the big thing what it did is it led to the creation of the State Board of Corrections and Charities. And something that's significant with that is that you're seeing where we have our state prisons, in jails and other institutions like that, and they're now also support that government entity that's also supporting our state hospitals and other different things that we today would look at as more mental and physical help as opposed to somebody who is going to jail. But in that time period, it was all under the same thing. Our modern day version of that would be the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services in one corner, and then the Department of Corrections completely in the center corner. So the Board of Corrections and Charities officially was created in 1871. It oversaw the management of the charitable, penal, and reformatory institutions in Michigan, supervised jails, almshouses, and other kindred places of detention and shelter, and compiled statistics related to the dependency, delinquency, and crime within Michigan. So this is just sort of a breakdown of what that looks like in sort of a graphical way. We have our state asylums and hospitals, first one being the one in Kalamazoo, and then places like Pontiac, Traverse City, the Ionia Asylum for the Criminally Insane, Lapeer, Caro, Newberry up in the UP, and then the Ann Arbor Psychopathic Hospital at the University of Michigan. We initially had the Institution for the Deaf, Dumb, and the Blind all in Flint, and then later they would move the School for the Blind to Lansing, and then I think they've consolidated everything back now into Flint. We have our county poorhouses. Even though they were run at the county level, you still had the Board of Corrections and Charities providing guidance of how things should be run. The state public school or the state orphanage was based out of Coldwater. We have our 2 reform schools. First, it was in Lansing where both boys and girls were there, but eventually they then created the girls' school in Adrian. And then our primary state prisons, Jackson, Ionia, and Marquette. All of that under the supervision of the Board of Corrections and Charities. And if you think about it, that was all as we were building our current state capitol, and it would have been just a couple people in one room that were making a lot of the decisions for all of these different entities. At the local level, we have our superintendents of the poor, which were 3 elected officials that oversaw the county's poor department. They would investigate the claims of individuals that applied for relief. I have heard in one instance where in Genesee County, instead of them being separate elected positions, what they would do is that people that ran for Board of Supervisors for the county, they would then delegate 3 of those individuals to take up those 3 positions. We then also have our Poor Farm keeper overseer that supervises the general operations at the Poor Farm itself. And this could be with 5 to 10 people. It could be up to 30 or 40, where you just have one person who's supposed to be making sure everybody is getting fed, and we're doing all the farming and breaking up disagreements and things like that. Also having the Poor Farm matron, which typically was the keeper's wife who would assist with the Poor Farm's female inmates. And if you look at the buildings based on the structure, you would often have it where the men were on one side and the women were on the other, but they tried very much to keep them separated during their time at the institutions. Now, typically, you wouldn't find children there. Eventually, in legislation, they would say that the children either had to be, they would go to the school in Coldwater, the state orphanage, or they would be placed elsewhere within the community. So like in Grand Rapids, after a certain point, there was like St. John's Orphan Asylum and Lodgett Home. So sometimes, and those were private or religious institutions. But otherwise, they would try to find homes for them to be at locally. Otherwise, if they could, they would try to find other family members. Because you'll find instances where they'd be using money to give somebody a train ticket to get them to go be with somebody else. Because it's a lot cheaper that way to just say, go with your distant aunt or uncle than have to be cared for locally. So just some definitions of supports. Outdoor relief is the assistance in the form of money, food, clothing, or goods given to alleviate poverty without the requirement that the person enter an institution. Indoor relief is that institutional housing for the poor, chronically ill, and mentally handicapped. An interesting aspect of all of this is what happens with non-residents. So any individual who had lived less than 1 year in a county would either be transported to the last county of origin, or the county of origin would be charged for relief services. This included even in death. So I've seen instances before where somebody, a good example is a guy by the name of Samuel Rogers, who was a Civil War veteran, later on became a newspaper editor in the Grand Rapids area. Well, at some point, he ended up at the Berrien County poorhouse. I believe he was dying from cancer of some sort, and he died there. Well, his primary residency wasn't in Berrien Springs, it was in the Grand Rapids area, so his body got shipped back, but it never got buried at the cemetery where the rest of his family was. He got buried in the poorhouse cemetery. So you can go out there and see where there's a stone that says S.E. Rogers, and that's where he's buried right there. I've also seen it where somebody had died at the Kent County facility, but they were originally from Isabella County, like by Mount Pleasant, and they shipped their body back up there, and it's buried in the cemetery where the Isabella County facility was in Shepherd. So everybody wants to get their money, wants to get, get compensated for services. This is kind of what we have on a more local level. So we have our board of supervisors, our 3 superintendents of the poor, our poorhouse keeper overseer. You can see there's a dotted line that goes to a contracted visiting physician. Typically, you weren't getting the best of services. It was usually the lowest bidder. The poorhouse matron, the laborers, if they felt it was necessary to hire on extra hired individuals. And then sort of the flow of the money is that cities and townships would often have their own local poor fund for providing outdoor relief within their municipalities, but then also the taxes would be going into the county fund that would be paying for the county facility that they would be directing people to if they needed indoor relief. And these wouldn't be the end all to be all. Sometimes people would get sent away for various reasons. When you ask the question about the children, that's a picture of what the state public school for orphan children in Coldwater looked like at one point. Opened in 1874 and closed in 1992. When it was closing, it was primarily a place for children with mental handicaps to go to. As far as those that were that didn't have that kind of medical need, I think they were just primarily trying to keep them within the local municipality. And then we have the Michigan Asylum for the Insane in Kalamazoo, which opened in 1859, and it's still there. It's the Kalamazoo Psychiatric Hospital. And you can see prior to that, we didn't have any asylums in Michigan, at least of that kind of capacity. So before that, we were sending people sometimes out east. I know there were some folks that were sent from Kent County to Vermont to a facility there, and then when they finally opened up institutions in Michigan, they would have to go out there and bring them back. And sometimes it would be one individual who was bringing back multiple people who had been sent to one of these psychiatric facilities. And then we have places like the Michigan Home for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic, and that's where you have individuals that maybe have the capacity for being trained to go back into normal life. I mean, it could be somebody with a certain level of Down syndrome or some other sorts of handicaps that they, with a little bit of assistance, they may be able to go back and function normally like anybody and everybody in normal society. We start to see some changes as we're getting past the turn of the century. In the 1908 Michigan Constitution changed the designation of county poorhouses to county infirmaries. And then Public Act number 163 of 1921 created the Michigan State Welfare Department, which was then the successor to the Board of Corrections and Charities. Welfare went in one direction, and then corrections stayed its own thing in its own corner. And you can see that we're starting to find that there's more of a need for some sort of medical assistance to be provided in these facilities, that we're not just going to treat them as body warehouses for folks. Unfortunately, in the 1930s, during the sort of height of the Great Depression, there was a fair amount of issues that were going on. I haven't read the full report, but when I came across this article from the Lansing State Journal, I had to use it just because of some of the text that was included. So like the fire peril is serious. The report termed that the infirmaries in Presque Isle and Aranac counties are fire traps, and said the infirmaries in Gladwin, Houghton, Alger, Hillsville, Branch, Benzie, Huron, Delta, Crawford, Lake, Gratiot, and Leelanau counties lack either adequate fire protection or satisfactory means of escape in case of a blaze. It is recommended that the Gladwin Infirmary be closed immediately as the chance of fire is too great to risk delay. Also talked about a few of them as being filthy. It kind of gave pretty scathing remarks towards some of these facilities and gave recommendations for how care can be changed. Talked a little bit about those that had a satisfactory designation, and just, you know, some of these buildings had been around, like in Kent County, theirs was from 1892, some of them were back to the 1880s, so 40 and 50 years into it, it's kind of time to start looking at the advances in medical technology and how we construct buildings and do more for the people that we're trying to care for. And this is also that point where we're getting the New Deal legislation that is making it so that we can provide more money to either keep people in their own homes through Social Security and other things like that. We also have it that the Welfare Reorganization Act abolishes the county superintendents of the poor, and then we're establishing local departments of social welfare under the county board of supervisors in each county. So we're not just treating people with this pejorative status, we're looking at them of like, okay, there's things that we need to do in a greater capacity to try and support them and try and find some relief to alleviate whatever is going on with that. And then finally, something that I kind of think was a bit of a death knell for some of these facilities was when Medicare came into legislation. So that being the National Health Insurance Program, providing health insurance for Americans 65 and older, and also for those that have a disability status by the Social Security Administration. And so as things were leading up to this in the 1950s, you would find that like many of the farming operations were going away. Kent County, I think by 57, they had sold off a lot of the land and the animals and other different things, tractors, other stuff like that was all going away. I think Ottawa counties, they continued using it for many more decades because they were incorporating occupational therapy as part of it, and you'll find that some of these facilities were trying to incorporate a lot of those modern day advances for assisting people. And then we find that many are just either closed or repurposed. With changes in legislation and funding, several Michigan County Poor Farms were closed, and then many of the buildings were demolished. But others involved as part of the county medical care facilities that we see today. There's roughly about 48 of them that exist in Michigan. If you're ever in the Lansing area, and you're over by Dobie Road, the Ingham County Medical Care Facility is over there. There's one in Allegan County. Oakland has one. There's a website that you can go to if you're trying to figure out where specifically one is for what covers a particular county. But like I said, only 48 of them exist, and that's out of the 83 counties that we have in Michigan. And what's kind of funny with this picture here, when the Kent County facility was being demolished, the people who bought the property started demolishing the building before they got the final okay from the county. And so it was just like, okay, I guess we're gonna give them the permit to do it. And that had its own issue itself, where the guy who bought it eventually built this new building and called it Calvin Christian Home. What do we normally think of when we think of the name Calvin? John Calvin. Well, the guy who owned it, his name was Calvin Dalton. He named it after himself. And eventually, I gave this presentation one time, and there was some individuals who had known of him and had either lived there initially when the building was built, or knew people that had gone there, and he kind of swindled some people out of money. And then later on, luckily Luther Services purchased it, and they're the ones that currently own property today. But I know there's some folks out there, if they ever hear the name Calvin Dalton, they're like, yeah, you better not be in Michigan anymore. Now, is that, And that's just one example of something that existed out there. If we look at some of the other facilities, the place where my great-great-grandmother was at in Gratiot County, it's still there. It's either used for apartments or for more of adult foster care home. The one in Clinton County by St. John's and also by Cassopolis for Cass counties, both of theirs are used as apartments. I had an interesting circumstance when I was taking the pictures that I have here for the Cass County facility is that I had gone to the cemetery and then drove around the building twice. And when I was doing the second, going around the building, I had my window down and I would take a couple pictures and then continue on. Well, somebody started marching out towards my car and they didn't look happy. And so I just took off because I'm like, this doesn't look like a discussion that I want to get into. And then they had one in Greenville, Montcalm County, that's used for adult foster care. The one in Shepherd is another county, the building is still there. It's in private ownership right now, and I got to stop by there when the building was for sale. And my dad and I happened to be driving back from either Midland or Saginaw from a football game, and I said, hey, it'd be kind of cool to stop and see this building. Well, we got there, we tried the doorknob, it opened, and we walked in. So I got some interior pictures of it, and my dad being Mr. Safety, we were there for about 2 minutes, and he was like, I don't think we should be here. So we walked out, and the cemetery is actually about, an eighth of a mile down the drive there, but eventually when I had to go back there, because I didn't know where the cemetery was at the time when we initially came, and I saw that it's now somebody owns it, and they must have done some interior fix-up because it looked in pretty bad shape on the inside. The one, and I see the one for Monroe here last out of all these because it's still being operated much how it was when the building was first constructed in the 20s. It's still in the same county infirmary building. It's run by the county, by Monroe County. They call it Fairview County Home. And I think it's one of the last examples of a Poor Farm County Infirmary building in its somewhat similar operation to what it would have been, excuse me, 60, 80 years ago. Now, are they still using modern medical techniques? Yes, they are. But it just kind of surprised me that, they're still using it. They haven't moved on to something different. And maybe for Monroe County, that's adequate, but it's just something that's kind of that unique little bubble out of the rest of these types of places. These are just a few others where I've got some pictures where you can see some before and after. So the Elder County one up in Chatham is now used as apartments, and I swear the only thing that's different is they added some garages right here in that set. Alpena's is used as an annex building for the hospital that's right behind it. And then Schoolcraft Counties, it's in private ownership. It was a bed and breakfast, but something that kind of I thought was a bit ironic, surprising, was that when I took this picture, this car right here is a Hummer, and it just doesn't fit that a Hummer is in front of a former poorhouse. But somebody who bought it must have a little bit of cash, and hopefully they're at least maintaining the original structure in some form or another. I haven't had a chance to go into any of these, but someday it'd be kind of cool to get in contact with a few of them and just say, hey, can I take a look and see how much of the interior architecture is still there? Just some active projects that are going on right now. The Leelanau County Historic Preservation Society is maintaining their poorhouse barn. The poorhouse building is gone, but their barn is still there, and they're actively doing several different programs related to it. They recently got a preservation award, I think, from the Historical Society of Michigan within the last couple of years. They're also working on a documentary for it. If you ever get a chance to go down to Hartford, Van Buren County Historical Society, their museum is in their old 1884 poorhouse building. They sadly had some damage back in 2022 when those big windstorms came through, but from what I understand from a few people that I know that volunteer there, they're pretty close to opening things back up, and that the insurance is covered getting, it's pretty major damage that they have right here, but they've got a new roof on it, and hopefully they'll be starting to move things back into it. So, and what's unique about that building is that its structure is almost the exact same style, architectural style for both Allegan County and Ottawa County's facilities. Because if you look at the Ottawa County Poor Farm, I'm only going to just give a few slides connected to it since we're in Holland and Ottawa County. I should talk a little bit about it. As you can see, that building looks quite similar. The only difference, at least that I can see from just first glance, is that it's got that really cool Penny Clausen style brick that's up on the top there. So these are just some pictures that were from the Coopersville Area Historical Society, included in the Grand Rapids Press article. If you're ever going to go out there, it's off of Leonard. So if you hit Eastmanville after you cross into the Grand River and then head over on Leonard, and then the barns are still here. That building itself and the addition that had been on it would have been roughly about right here. Their cemetery is still in the back, and a lot of the farmland is now walking and hiking and horseback riding trails. So they also have some really nice interpretive plaques that are up towards the front by the parking area. And this is just kind of a 1912 map that just shows how much acreage that they had at the time. So it looks like they had about 40 acres on the riverside of what would have been Leonard, and then another 160 acres, and then 40 more acres that were in the other section. So they had quite a bit of property out there for their operations. This is just kind of a write-up of what's listed in the 1872 abstract for the annual reports for the superintendents of the poor, talking about the good condition of the poorhouse. Our general condition is good. We intend to keep everything in good repair, make all repairs as fast as needed. We have purchased one bathtub during the year, shall purchase one or two more for the coming year. The buildings are warmed by one wood furnace situated in the basement of the upright part. This warms the keepers and women's part of the house. The men's and insane apartments are warmed by two large stoves with drums. One cook stove for the keepers, one cook stove for the paupers, and one stove in the washroom. 15 sleeping rooms have ventilation in or above the doors, besides outside windows. The balance of the rooms have outside windows. The general treatment of the paupers is good. We believe that a pauper is a human being and should be treated as such. That wasn't always the case at every facility, sadly. We believe in making them comfortable in every respect as we can, furnish them with a variety of food, usually raised on the farm, also sugar, molasses, tea, coffee, etc., 3 meals a day. So they went into quite detail with this narrative that they wrote up that was included with their annual reports. Others would have very limited information, but it's really nice that they have this in there. And just to kind of give you an idea as far as how things compared with other counties in that time period. So if we look at Ottawa County in 1872, there was 50 total people that were helped at the Ottawa County Poor Farm facility. In comparison to like Kent County, there was 115, Kalamazoo 59, Jackson 109. These are just a number of different random counties that I chose that either population or nearby. As far as the average number of people there, it was roughly around 28. Number under the age of 16 was 7 over the course of that year, and then those that they supported outside of the poorhouse in 1872 was roughly about 180 people. So it looks like they were able to more support people outside as opposed to having to do indoor relief. But then when you look at Wayne County, the numbers are 832, average number over, at the building at any time is 178, and then those that were served outside, 1,700 people. Just, less than a decade after the Civil War had ended. If you're ever looking for more information about the Ottawa County facility, there's a couple different publications that you can look at. Nobody's ever written like a full book on it, but there's an article that Margie Vavine wrote. If you ever hear her talk present on the Ottawa County Poor Farm, she's a very good and dynamic speaker. Ticket to the Poor Farm that was in the Joint Archives Quarterly in 2016. Deborah Sturtevant, I have a hard time pronouncing her last name. Sturtevant. What is it? Sturtevant. There we go. Okay, it's a group effort. She wrote a really good article in Michigan History magazine in 1992 called Ottawa County Community Haven, a poor farm that stands the test of time. And she had also been a long-time Hope College professor, and I've run into her before. She certainly somebody that I should have a bit more conversations on, because she not only worked, did a lot of research on it, but also had worked with other aspects of social services as well. And then there was also a documentary that was made by joint between the Ottawa County Parks Foundation and Ferris State, along with people like Margie Vavine. That's on YouTube, so you can watch it for free. It's about 40 to 45 minutes long. And just some pictures of what it looks like if you go out to like the cemetery, a bit of the barns that were from the Ottawa County website, showcasing the Eastmanville Park. So I'm just going to do a few slides on just how to research an inmate. If you are researching somebody that was at a Michigan County poorhouse, just know that locations of records are going to vary. Many of them remain in the custody of either the county government, at the courthouse, or in an archives facility. Some governments have donated the records to local or university or the state archives in their collection. Others can be found in the offices of the institution that replaced the poor farm or poorhouse, such as a local nursing home. And some may have been kept by the institution's last director and hopefully in some form retained by their descendants and not just tossed out. But sadly, many of them have either been lost or destroyed because, in part, retention schedules for these were never in effect to say, we need you to hold on to this stuff. This is a picture of the Will Carleton Poorhouse in Hillsdale. Will Carleton was a poet from Michigan and got well known when he wrote a famous poem in the 1870s called Over the Hill to the Poorhouse, and that's the building that was the inspiration for that. You can look at different compiled records and indexes that people have put together. I know a few people have worked on putting some material together for the Ottawa County Poor Farm. Sometimes these can be just where they've done the work to transcribing census records and death records and other things like that. And we also have records for Maple Grove Poor Farm, Paris Township. Some of these we have at the Library of Michigan. We try to get copies of people who produce things like this. And I know that Grand Rapids Public Library, I think Herrick might have a few of these as well, at least for the ones that are nearby. If you can, you really hope to get the inmate register books, because these would be where they would write down all this information when somebody first came to a facility and during their time that they were there. Talking about just their background, when they came there, when they left, the cause of poverty, if they were blind, mute, epileptic, or deaf or insane, if they died, who received the body, if it was buried on site, if it was buried elsewhere, if they didn't die but they were transferred someplace else, because you would sometimes have it where somebody was sent to like the Kalamazoo Psychiatric Hospital or elsewhere, and they divided them by city, county, and township cases. For Kent County, I only know of 2 register books, one from 1895 to 1912, that's at the Samaritas facility, that's on the current site of the Kent County Poor Farm, and then one from 1930 to 1943 that's at the State Archives. And keeping in mind, you know, they were at that site from 1855 up until 1971, when they then moved over to Kent Community Hospital. So you've only got a few decades of time covering all of the folks that were there. Now, if you can't find them, just know there's other things that you can use to either give you more of a story of what life would have been like, or maybe some other information about people there. Looking at the County Board of Supervisor proceedings, because you can often find some interesting things about when buildings were constructed, or in this case, this one from the Daily Inquirer and Herald in October 17, 1857, it says, resolved by the Board of Supervisors of the County of Kent that the superintendents of the poor of the County of Kent be and they are hereby instructed to select a suitable place upon the County Poor Farm for the interment of deceased paupers and to cause the same to be properly enclosed. That's when the cemetery was started. So I know now that if anybody died out there, after just 2 years after they bought that property, there was a cemetery out there at some location. Sad part is nowadays, the starting point where I know where somebody's buried was that somebody where I know for sure the body is, or where it would have been, is from 1893. So from 1857 to 1893, they were somewhere, but I don't know where yet. If you can find the annual reports of the superintendents of the poor for the county, you can get lots of different things like statistics of who was there, number of people that were that died there. Sometimes you might even have number of births, because some of the times these facilities acted as locations for like unwed mothers to give birth to their children. Other things as far as like the causes of people having to be maintained there, whether they were feeble-minded, broken limb, blindness, old age, intemperance, paralysis, syphilis, desertion, and several other different reasons, list of nationalities, different expenses. So maybe you might not know too much about an individual ancestor, but you at least get what life was like through something like this. And sometimes they would have written narratives. If you can't find the actual annual report, you can at least look in the abstracts that we have at the Library of Michigan, because that had to be sent on to the state. And just things like those written narratives I was reading a little bit earlier for the Ottawa County one. This is a write-up that was for Ingham County in 1898. And just several other different statistics that are in there as well. An interesting thing is the proceedings of the convention of the State Association of Superintendents of the Poor. The superintendents of the poor and poorhouse keepers had their own sort of employment association, kind of like how librarians have the American Library Association, and they would meet yearly, and often they would be talking about individual staff or inmates, and sometimes this would get down to transcripts of what they were actually saying while at the meeting. You can also find some inspection reports that are over at the state archives, whether it's talking about, it's filthy, fire hazards, or if they're actually doing some good things. Social welfare ones are a bit interesting because those get into like the 1930s and 40s. They don't always talk about individual inmates, but I did see one time for a county where there was a recommendation of sterilizing members of the family. So we don't do that these days, but that, back in the 30s and 20s, that was something that was going on. Looking at the account books of other different people that were affiliated in some way, Wright Coffinberry had been Kent County Superintendent of the Poor during the 1880s, and many of his papers are at the Bentley Library and at the University of Michigan. And what's really cool is that it has where it talks about cash paid for ticket to Muskegon for Mrs. Scott, 95 cents. And then other things for cash paid out for John Brown, so that he got a hat for 75 cents and then a ticket to Three Rivers for the cost of $1.10. So they didn't go to the poorhouse, but this may be one lone record for their needing public assistance in some way. And then this is one of my favorites. If you can get photos, photos are awesome, especially when you get them from like former staff. And I happened to meet a gentleman by the name of Richmond Houghton, who both his parents worked at the Kent County facility. And they have this photo album that's for the 98th birthday party in 1955 for a Mr. Loring Goldsmith. So that's him and his friends that were on top of the infirmary building on the deck there. That's him himself, Mr. Loring, looking pretty good for 98. But the best part is where they have everybody's names and they list their age. It's 846 years of lifetime amongst all these gentlemen right there. If you could just grab a cup of coffee, a bunch of donuts, and a tape recorder or a video camera and just get everything down, because I'm sure they had a lot of stories to tell from their experiences in lifetime. Looks like the youngest was 74, and then Loring at 98. So I haven't ever gotten around to like researching these individual people, but you could probably write a whole book just if you could ever get all that information. Certainly looking at the census, it's important to note that jails, hospitals, poorhouses, and insane asylums are often at the end of the regular population schedule. And just know, staff will be listed first, followed by the inmates, and that you'll often find inconsistencies more than usual because you may be dealing with language barriers, mental handicaps, or just a lack of information known about the individuals. And then you can get some more unique ones, like in 1880 they had the defective, dependent, and delinquent supplemental schedule, and that they would list by name those who were insane, idiots, deaf mutes, blind, homeless children, inhabitants of prison, and those that were paupers or indigents. This is one for Calhoun County. It looks like most of theirs that were at the poorhouse were for old age, one for rheumatism, one because they lost their leg, and they're for old age. Newspaper articles, sometimes you'll get individuals that might be more well known for either their length of time or just their personality. Esther Lott was somebody who was at the Kent County facility for, according to that article, 35 years before she died. She's buried out there and just was quite well known for her very maternal attitude that she had. She somehow came from New York and ended up in the Grand Rapids area. This is just another one that shows Calhoun Poor Farm pays its own way, and this is in 1935. Looking at the death returns, sometimes you'll get lucky where they'll specifically say in those ones from 1867 to 1897 that somebody died at the poorhouse and not just in the county or in the township. But then when you're looking at a death record, the more standardized one that they started using in the 1890s, look for clues like the location of death. If it says county home, county infirmary, it's a good indication that they had been an inmate there at some point. If the informant is the keeper or somebody related to the superintendents of the poor, and then for the location of burial at the County Poor Farm Cemetery. Now you could have it where somebody is buried at the cemetery and never died at the poor farm, because some of them may be using the cemetery as a potter's field, along with for those who died at the facility. And certainly looking at funeral home records, you'll find indications on there of where they died at as being from a poorhouse as opposed to someplace else. And sometimes individual counties would use certain funeral homes so you can kind of get used to finding patterns in the records of who they were using. And these are just some examples of some of the poor farm cemeteries. Something that's cool about the Muskegon one is that the Genealogical Society has been working with the county to GIS the entire cemetery. So you can go on their website and find out where individual people are buried. I would love to do that for every single poor farm in Michigan. Ionia's, there's no stones, there's just a plaque that lists the names of people that are buried there. And then this is what the Kent County facilities looks like right now. I estimate there's roughly about 800 people that are buried out there, and only about a quarter of them have stones. If you're looking for some recommended reading, if you want to be reading this stuff late at night, older books like The Alms House Construction and Management by Alexander Johnson that came out in 1911, The American Poor Farm and Its Inmates, which is a hard to find U.S.-wide report that came out in 1926. Michigan Poor Law by Isabel Campbell Bruce and Edith Eichhoff. And then some more modern publications, In the Shadow of the Poorhouse, Social History of Welfare in America by Michael B. Katz. Almshouses and Mental Institutions in Michigan is a really good dissertation that came out from the University of Michigan in 1986. Excuse me. The Poorhouse, America's Forgotten Institution by David Wagner. And then finally, a recent one that I still need to read that I haven't gotten to yet is The Fundamental Institution, Poverty, Social Welfare, and Agriculture in American Poor Farms. And then lastly, something that's a bit more of a, I don't want to call it a lighter read, but something that's a bit more interesting to read that's not just facts, is Annie's Ghost, A Journey into a Family Secret, which was a 2010 Michigan Notable Book and a Great Michigan Read in 2013 and 2014. And it's about Steve Luxembourg researching the aunt that he didn't know that he had because she had been sent to Eloise and nobody talked about her. She just was sort of lost to the family because of the mental illness that she had and the stigma of not wanting to talk about her in front of everybody else. Okay, I know I've hit you with a lot. What kind of questions do you have? Yes?
So, how did you end up there? Like, if again, you couldn't support yourself, could you just walk up to a poorhouse, a poor farm, knock on the door, or did it have to go through, like, paperwork, like a...
I think more early on, if somebody from the county, or if you just sort of raised your hands and said, like, I need help, it was a little bit more easier to get you in. Now, after some point, and I don't know how to include this yet because I'm still kind of learning about it, is how much the probate court was involved. Because when you start dealing with mental illness and needing multiple people to say that, like, this is somebody who needs help even though they're refusing to take it, that would be something as well. So if you're trying to research somebody and you're not really finding too much luck, I would start looking at the probate court to see if they have anything, especially if it was somebody who had to go on to, like, someplace like Kalamazoo Psychiatric Hospital or some other sort of assistance in some way. But I've heard examples of, like, in the 50s and 60s that guys would come and go during, like, the summer and winter months, that they would just leave when it was summer because they could just hang out outside and not have to worry as much about the bad weather. But then, you know, Michigan snowstorms show up, they're like, yeah, I want to come in. And even during the day, that, like, a few examples from Kent County is some of the guys would go over to the golf course over by 28th Street, you know where Indian Trails is, collect golf balls, sell them to the golfers, use the money to go to one of the local watering holes, get a little bit tipsy, and then have to somehow make their way back at night. And sometimes they would kind of knock on doors in the middle of the night and say, where do I gotta go? So probably weren't doing that in Eastmanville because it's a bit more out of town, but I could see, you know, things like that in other places. But I mean, it's hard to find like the records of, I forget how you would register somebody to go in. That's still something that I'm kind of trying to work my way through to kind of answer a kind of question like that.
Because in the 1855 or whatever, it wasn't like you could hop on a bus. And,
Yeah.
I mean, again, for your great-great-grandmother.
Yeah.
How did she get from point A to point B?
Now, I think with her, it might have been one of her kids just said, we don't have the capacity to take care of mom. Let's bring her to the county facility. And they dropped her off there. Now, she was only there for a few weeks until I think either one of her kids picked her up. Because eventually when she made it to Traverse City, one of her sons was also living in Traverse City. So maybe there was I'm going to take mom, bring her to a facility up here by me, and then we'll see how she lasts for the next few years. But for other cases, I mean, it could be that there's the tramp that's outside of town, and somebody who's working for the police department says, hey, maybe we should do something with them and try and get some help or eliminate a problem by institutionalizing them. So I know it's a great question that I wish I had more of a defined way of like how it was, but it's still a bit of a elusive thing for me. Other questions? Yeah.
We saw the mine from the late 60s, most of that were not operating anymore.
Well, they were either evolving into the modern county medical facilities that we know today, or privatization is coming in too, because like the modern nursing homes that we see today, a lot of them are privately run, either as a nonprofit or as a for-profit entity. I mean, like, for example, my grandmother during the last few years of her life was at, not Railside, it's the Sheldon Meadows that's over in Hudsonville. And so it's a privately run institution. And as that privatization is kind of kicking in, especially because being able to use either your Social Security to pay for it, or I'm sure with, like with Grandma Barb, there was long-term care insurance that she bought into, and as that was sort of becoming a thing for people to use, that they would have that to help pay for these things. So counties were just sort of evaluating, deciding, okay, how much do we want to devote municipal dollars to pay for this, as opposed to just letting private sector, or maybe it was a joint private-public cooperation, because like Network 180, I think in Kent County is a bit like that, where they have both private and public parts of it.
People who had no money for pay for private.
Yeah.
What was it?
Well, it would either be Social Security or not too much else. Maybe they had something that was left over from an employer, or I don't know. I think a lot of it is just that there comes a point where it's either Social Security because of age or because of disability, and those welfare dollars are kind of paying for that. So, I don't know. It's weird because I don't know. It's like that just for being somebody who works in state government. There's so many different things that are part of the process that, like, part of it is paid for by grants that are federal dollars, and then there's other money that is coming from a private foundation that's supporting this, and it's interesting waters in the modern times that we exist in today. Other questions? Well, if you do think of any, come visit us at the Library of Michigan, or you can shoot an email to librarian@michigan.gov. That's our general reference email. I'm one of the ones who monitors it. Our website is michigan.gov/Library of Michigan. And if you ever want to get into doing more research, I'd also encourage you to get a Library of Michigan library card, because that gives you access to a lot of online resources that we have. And feel free to come grab our services and collections brochure.